All right, let me start off with one of my favorite great quotes, which may not be too familiar with you, but certainly resonates with the reality of workers all around the world today. And the quote goes, "Work keeps at bay three great evils." And what are they? Boredom, vice, and need. Of course, COVID-19 pandemic has aggravated premonitions of, I quote, twitching of muscles of the labor force. For purposes of clarification, the twitching of muscles is manifesting by way of imminent work loss, reduction of salaries, social exclusion, all of which, as I said earlier on, have been aggravated by coronavirus pandemic. Now, the coronavirus pandemic has also disrupted traditional ways of doing things. We now have, of course, from social gatherings such as religious worship, restriction of movement, to complete shutdown of the workforce. Now, many events have also been cancelled as a result, and sadly, the current lockdown and physical distancing measures have also affected the labor force, which means that traditional May Day celebration will not hold this year. Let me explain. For the first time in almost 40 years of Workers' Day celebration in Nigeria and 130 years in the history of May Day, workers all around the world will not manifest their struggles via the traditional platforms of March Past and all that. But beyond this, workers have paid the supreme price dealing with the pandemic at the front line. Many others have lost wages or means of their livelihood. Salaries have been reduced, especially at the subnational levels. And many others are on the verge of plunging into extreme poverty. And that's as a result of the new normal way of life occasioned by COVID-19. There is little doubt that the pandemic has also thrown up traditional conversation on the welfare, security, and social justice and inclusion of workers, which spiked up the global workers' agitation in 100 and of course 130 years ago for that matter. Now, regardless of all this seemingly gloomy picture that I've painted, governments are reviewing their policy responses to restore workers' confidence. But here at home, the federal government is implementing stimulus packages as well as other incentives to cushion the impact of the pandemic on Nigerian workers. So on Late Edition this week, our eye is on celebrating Workers' Day in a COVID-19 pandemic. I am Claire Adilabu Abdurrazak. Thank you for joining me. All right, let me quickly introduce my two gentlemen guests today. Comrade Ayuba Waba is a public health specialist. He studied at the School of Health Technology, Maiduguri, also Royal Institute of Public Administration in London. He has vast experience, and I say vast experience and track record in industrial relations, and has also served in various capacities, including just a few: President, National Union of Health Technology Students, State Secretary, Medical and Health Workers Union. He was also Chairman, Nigeria Labour Congress, that's Borno State Chapter. He was Chairman, Joint Health Sector Unions, JOHESU, and Chairperson, West Africa Health Sector Unions Network. Comrade Ayuba Waba is the President of the Nigeria Labour Congress NLC. He sits as member on various professional boards and an alumnus of the prestigious National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies, NIPSS Kuro. My second guest, simply known as Dan Neburaho, he's a Director, Productivity, Measurement and Labor Standards at the Ministry of Labor and Employment, former Executive Director, African Regional Labor Administration Center. He's also former Vice President for Africa and International Association for Labor Inspection. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. Let me wish you I should congratulate you on Workers' Day today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure, and happy Workers' Day.
Thank you. I want to start with the NLC president, because just before we came on set, I was asking you, you know, how is it like being a Labour president? And you said to me, you like to make trouble. So NLC and trouble, how has it been?
Well, thank you very much. As we are aware, trade unions are essentially organization of workers. And that's why the Constitution Section 40 provides that every worker has a right to belong to a trade union for the purposes of protecting his interests. This also is in line with the International Labour Organization, particularly Convention 87 and 98, which provides the same right. So it's among the universal rights that workers are supposed to enjoy. So clearly speaking, from time immemorial, workers' right has never been given on the platter of gold. In fact, workers have to struggle. And that's the history of May Day. May Day started in 1886 in Haymarket. That's when workers struggled to abolish the work or working for more than 8 hours a day. In fact, at that time, workers work for 24 hours. You don't have leave. You don't have maternity leave. You don't have social protection. Nothing so ever, because that was the era of the first industrial revolution. And therefore, it is within the context of what was happening then. Because you also know that the International Labour Organization was formed also more than 100 years ago. So within those periods, workers then have to struggle. And that's how the history of how workers formed a union in Chicago, and then wrestle the employers, who are exploiters at that point in time, because everything is about profit. It's profit before people. So that's how they wrestled and then get some of this concession. In the process, some workers actually died. They paid the supreme price. But thereafter, things begin to change.
So it's all about agitation.
Yes. So the ILO came into being. And since then, it has been one struggle after another, from one era to another, and you know, now we are in the fourth industrial revolution. So the struggle has continued.
Some people believe that you stir up trouble where there is none.
No, it's not true.
I mean, not you, NLC.
No,
Labour.
it's not true. The fact is that we are a conscious organization. Even during the military, you remembered, even eras pre-independent, you remember the role of workers, particularly the railway. You remember Pamake Imodu? He was in the forefront of agitation to ensure that workers' rights are respected and that we have a decent society, a society that works for everybody in line with our Constitution. The Constitution said the primary purpose of governance is the security and welfare of the people. How do we ensure that the welfare of the people take precedence over profit or over exploitation? This is the hallmark of trade union. We are a conscious organization. You remember the agitation we had during the era of SAP, Nigeria not for sale. We said Nigeria is not for sale because we know for sure that other clients are looking at only our resources. And therefore, they detect what happens in our country. So you need social organizations like NLC. You need credible civil society organizations. In fact, let me tell you, what makes a society a better society is when you have strong institutions. It's not strong individuals. Once you have strong institutions, like the NLC and many institutions that are pan-Nigerian institutions, then we'll have a better society. So this has been the whole history of labor movement in Nigeria to try to protect the right of workers. You remember how we got the first minimum wage?
Yes.
In 1981. It was not given on the platter of gold, despite the fact that there is a law on national minimum wage by the ILO. So at that time, Nigeria could not actually key into that law. And therefore, exploitation has been going on. And therefore, you recall that it was the NLC that actually drove the process under our first president, founding president, Hassan Sumunu. It was...
If the NLC was, as a union now, if the union, you know, was as profitable or as supportive or as protective of the plights or rights of workers, why is it just... why does it appeal to a particular, you know, segment of the society? Why is it not universal? Why is it not universally embraced? Because there are some, you know, institutions that don't even have a union.
It's not true. Employers will always don't want their workers to join unions because of the fact that once the workers join union, they will be able to protect the right of other workers. Think, for instance, anything a worker have gotten in Nigeria up to today, it arose from union agitation.
Both public and private?
Both public and private. Just go through. Call one thing that you have gotten. It arose because of trade union agitation, because the main purpose of union is to protect your interests. Businesses are not there, as I said earlier, to protect your interests. No, business is for profit. I bring my money, I set up companies, I want to make profit at the end of the day. Despite the fact that some companies are now posting humongous profit, but yet they see workers as slaves. Look at the banking sector in Nigeria today. Year in, year out, they post humongous profit. But what is the condition of workers? In fact, that's where the issue of casualization is perverse. Outsourcing of services is perverse. So nobody will willingly give you what you want as a worker, even to incentivize what you are doing, without you agitating. So this has been the history of union movement, the history of May Day, and all through those eras. I was trying to share with you how we got the first May Day. We got the first, in fact the first May Day, before May Day was declared a public holiday, you remember the struggle, and then the first minimum wage, which was in 1981. It was through our collective struggle. In fact, I remember that time, there was a strike for 3 days before President Shagari now said, no, this demand is legitimate, let us give them what they want. That's how we got 125 naira, which was equivalent to $200 at that time, which is more than what we have now. So look at the history, look at the struggle. So workers must know that and take ownership of their organization.
I will come back to you to tell us, of course, let's look at the evolution of this struggle in line with the dynamics in the demands of workers. You know, I'll come to you to speak to that. But let me bring in Mr. Dan here, if I may call you Dan. Government is always the defendant in all of this.
Yes, but even though government is the defendant, if you say so, but we in government see ourselves as primarily there to collaborate, to partner, and to work together with the trade unions and employers to ensure that workers get the fair share, you know, of the fruits of their labor. So to that extent, we always seek to work together to create an enabling environment where the prosperity of workers is guaranteed.
I know you are first and foremost a worker,
yes,
a member of the body.
Yes.
But you are also seated here in the capacity of the government. You are representing the government on this seat.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask you, evaluate the quantity and composition of the struggle. Has there been any any progress?
Yeah,
because all along, it's the same. The struggles are the same over the same issues.
Yes, because you see, workers' issues usually center around basic things. For instance, hours of work, wages, for instance, you know, general conditions of service, you know. So the point is that we always want to continue to seek for ways of improving the situation. You know, that is government has an interest in ensuring that workers' prosperity is guaranteed, workers' welfare, that there is decent work at all times for workers, because...
Yes, my question is basically, do you think that governments over the years have been responsive? Have they been able to address, you know, even the core issues? If so, to what degree?
Yeah, we have to a very large extent, because you see, for instance, some of the areas in which workers have been exploited over time, which Comrade President has also highlighted, are some of the areas which from time to time government has sought to address. For instance, he talked about the issue of casualization now, which is something that we are very much determined to address headlong, you know, and we have put in place policies, you know, regulations to actually address these issues. For instance, the recruiter's license regime, for instance, the employment exchange. But we are quite familiar that most employers, like he has rightly said, will always want to circumvent these laws and policies. So now we are determined to address it, because you also notice that the Minister of Labour himself has also, in some of his policy statements, stated his determination to address these issues, not only in the banking industry, as is rightly mentioned, also in the construction industry, the oil and gas sector, where the activities of some employers are very, very discouraging and not very encouraging. So we want to address them, resolve some of these issues of you outsource your labor and then you bring in a triangular relationship in which the workers are the ones that are adversely affected.
Okay, let me return to Comrade. I asked again earlier on how the struggle has evolved, of course, in keeping with the dynamics of, the needs. If you know, I mean, we all know that insecurity, the way it is now, is evolving. You talked about casualization. It's another evolving, issue and all that. So can you speak to us how May Day celebration?
The struggle essentially have also evolved. Initially, it is about bread and butter issues. That is core workers' welfare issue. But we realize that we live in the larger society. Particularly, we live in the larger Nigerian society. And therefore, what also affects Nigerians affect us. Because first and foremost, we are Nigerians before we will become workers. So we have gone also to raise fundamental issues of socio-economic, issues of security, issues of corruption. You find out that in everything, issues of democracy. Labour also fought for democracy. So clearly speaking, we have gone into many, many areas because of the fact that I said we are a conscious organization, and therefore we have also expanded our scope of engagement to engage policies. Year in, year out, we engage on policy issues, on how best to make governance better for all of us. So clearly this is how labor agitation have actually evolved from the issue of bread and butter, which is about salary, about working condition. Now we are looking at broader issues of governance, issues of good governance, issues of corruption, issues of the economy. How do we make the economy to blossom? Because at the end of the day, we realize that if we don't address all those other connecting issues, then you cannot discuss the issue of workers' welfare in isolation.
But we also still see labor, adopting the same traditional ways of, pursuing the struggles, the agitations, strikes,
it has changed.
Picketing.
Yeah, many people don't understand that strike is actually as a matter of last resort. You don't just start with a strike. No, there are procedures. And let me also inform you that after the First World War, when over 100 years ago, when the ILO was formed as the first agency of the United Nations, there are global standards now about how to relate with workers, about how to address the issues of workers. So there are standards even for you to go on strike.
Like I said, Comrade has said, we keep on advocating the phenomenon of social dialogue, negotiations, social dialogue, which of course has evolved. And because of our strong belief in social dialogue, that is why Nigeria did not hesitate when we were discussing at the ILO level on the Convention 144.
Many a times.
Which has to do with tripartism and social dialogue.
Many a times.
You will find that Nigeria was one of the countries that first ratified that convention. And we are very, very determined to ensure that. So we have set up structures even.
Many a times we hear of government spokesperson, government representatives come out to accuse the unions, especially the NLC now, of a unilateral decision of going on strike and all that. So how he has said, look, our strategy has evolved from just, in fact, strike is the last option. Is that what it is now?
No. Strike is the last option.
Is that what the NLC? Does NLC see strike as the last option?
Yeah, I believe so. I believe they see it. They see it as the last option.
Is it how it is done?
Let me tell you.
I'd like him to say because
yes, because there is no other option than to embrace dialogue. And these are people who have very seasoned, and they are very seasoned in labor administration. Beyond that, even we are even trying to see that we do a number of things in common. For instance, we are trying to ensure that labor inspection, which is one of the keys.
So whenever labor gets up to say, look, we are down in tools, it is the last option. All available, options have been exhausted. Is that what you're saying? So that we know, anytime Comrade Ayuba comes up to say, look, workers down to, we know that they've exhausted.
No. Actually, if we follow the procedures established for the resolution of grievances and disagreements. We should not even get to the strike option. Yeah, because it is there. The procedure for settling disputes, we take it from mediation, conciliation, arbitration. We have the industrial arbitration panel. We have the National Industrial Court. By the time we exhaust all of these procedures, there is no way the dispute cannot be resolved. And even without that, we still continue dialogue. Social dialogue is very enduring and it's a very costly business.
Do disputes ever get resolved?
Well, let me tell you, in some instances, there are some disputes that will be resolved amicably, where those provisions are respected. But there are also some disputes where employers take unilateral decision. Like the example I gave you. Somebody wake up after a contract. The issue of wage is a contract. You have a signed contract. An employer just wake up one day and say, well, I'm reducing your salary with 50% without discussing with you, without putting the facts on the table. You have been pushed to the wall. So it's a matter of last option. Even at that, you give him notice that this thing you have done is outside the law. Can we dialogue and address the issue? And the person will be adamant. So the worker is not a slave. And what is required in that context is for you to give formal notice. To say because you have acted outside the law, because this is a dispute of your right. Your right is being trampled upon. So anywhere you see that there is actually a strike action, it will not happen overnight. No. There must be communication. There must have been notice. Notice must have been given. Or in most cases, there is even a collective bargaining agreement where there is a social dialogue, agreement signed, but one party refused to implement deliberately. So in this case, workers in most cases are frustrated. They have no any other option than to try to force their way for this issue to be resolved. Sometimes it's over-delayed. An issue that can be solved in 1 day, 3 months. Take, for instance, the issue of your wages.
Why do you think, you yourself, Comrade President, describe labor as an essential commodity? If that is so, what do you think that government most always will renege on implementing agreed,
Let me try to correct that impression. According to the ILO Constitution, labor is not a commodity. Labor should not be treated like a commodity. You pick here, you throw here, you do whatever you want to do. No. Labor is not a commodity. We are human beings. And therefore, we have families to take care of. We have needs. And we work to earn a living. So that's the context of ILO. Okay. So what I'm saying in essence is that once there are procedures, two parties in a discussion and in a negotiation, it is expected that everybody will respect the provisions of the law to do what is right.
But sometimes
in some cases,
it seems ridiculous.
No, let me give you an example. In the banking sector now, without discussion, many banks have laid down thousands of workers. No discussion. Where the law said, even for you to declare redundancy, even where there is no union, the worker must be taken into consideration. That never happened. The law is never expected. So you expect us just to fold our arms, not to protest that and protect Nigerian workers. Because they are Nigerian workers. In other climes, this doesn't happen. People respect the law. Or where overnight, you now turn permanent workers to casuals because you don't want to pay social security cover. These are the issues. It doesn't apply to government alone. It also applies to largely other employers of labor. So in this context, after all dialogue and reconciliation failed, what do you expect the worker to do? Worker is not a slave. And these have been tested in many countries. You have seen recently the teachers in the United States went on strike because of such issues. This is an advanced economy where you think that everything should follow the normal process. And that strike should be the last option. Yes, it's the last option. But that's why in the law, it's also said, these are the processes you follow before you go on strike. Give notice. 21 days, 7 days is there. Before you now declare an industrial action. So the strike is not a tea party, madam. It's never a tea party. No worker wants to go on strike. No worker is a strike monger. No. I can say that because it also takes a lot of energy even to organize strike. So no worker. Look at the history of strikes in Nigeria, including the one that started during Michael Emodu, that led to our independence. Can you say that that was a reckless strike? No, it was not. It was the consciousness of workers. Some can be quiet when your right is being trampled upon. But because of the consciousness we have, certainly we need to make sure that every worker is his interest is actually protected, including you, including Mr. Dan. That's the essence of it.
Fine.
Take for instance the last minimum wage. The law said no. It wasn't a law.
Don't go there. Don't go there, Comrade President. Don't go there yet. Let's just take a short break now. When we come back, I'd like for us, before we even go there, when we come back from the break, I would like Dan to give us a sense of understanding of what he thinks from the government perspective, how Nigerian workers now coming down home, have fared in terms of, their needs and demands. This is late edition, and we're looking at workers in a state of pandemic. Don't go away, we'll be right back.
James, I don't know, you need to answer your call. This. Hello?
Is this Mr. Peter? I'm calling from the NCDC. Your friend, Mr. James Okripocha, was brought in this morning and tested positive for the coronavirus. He mentioned that he had been in close contact with you.
God forbid bad thing.
Sir, I am not saying that you have the virus, but you have spent some time with him over the past 14 days and it is better if you self-isolate immediately.
I don't know any James at all. Even only James in the Bible that I know as a good Christian.
Sir, he showed us pictures.
Now, wow. If you have come in contact with someone who has tested positive for the coronavirus, self-isolating is key to protecting those around you. Remember, viruses don't move, people do. Stopping the spread is in your hands.
This message is from the Akinfade Foundation in partnership with the National Orientation Agency with support from MacArthur Foundation.
All right, welcome back. You're watching Late Edition this week, and we're looking at celebrating Workers' Day in a state of pandemic, specifically COVID-19. And I have with me two gentlemen, Comrade Ayuba Waba, who is the NLC president. Also have Dan Neborahu, Director, Productivity Measurement and Labor Standards at the Ministry of Labor and Employment. Once again, gentlemen, thank you for joining me on the program. Dan, I was going to take you just before we went on break to evaluate, are Nigerian workers any better off now?
Well, I think I can confidently say that in the life of this administration, or maybe to say that since our return to democracy, Nigerian workers have generally felt better, or felt much more better than their counterparts elsewhere, maybe in Africa, from my assessment. And this is because this administration in particular is one that is workers friendly. President Muhammadu Buhari's government is a government that is workers friendly. And this has cascaded down all to various levels of the administration. So workers need certain basic things to be happy. They need good jobs. They need to be productively employed. And you can also see that in terms of job creation, the administrations have actually done well to actually create jobs for Nigerian people, Nigerian workers and their families. Then there's also, workers also need to be socially protected, social protection. And you can see the various social protection measure schemes, social protection schemes that governments have tried to put in place to enhance workers' livelihood and prosperity. I don't need to mention them. You can look in the area of housing, for instance, the number of housing schemes that have, the housing schemes that have been embarked upon by governments, also with the view to ensure that workers and their families are well housed.
For public workers?
Not only for public workers, because the schemes are also available. And you see government going into partnership with housing developers to build low-cost houses all over the place. Those houses are not just available for public workers alone. People in the private sectors are also free to avail themselves of these houses. And the mortgage institutions also have been strengthened to be in a position to also give loans to workers generally. So it's not general. It's not schemes that are restricted to the private sector workers.
So for you, it's been value addition.
It's been value addition. Yes, it's been value addition. And then you look at, for instance, we're also talking about salaries and wages. For instance, workers' incomes have been increased, but again, to do that, the overall objective of government is to create an enabling environment that will enable industries to thrive. Not only big industries, but also small and medium enterprises. Because all these are the ways in which the sustainability of enterprises and the sustainability of incomes can be guaranteed. You get my point? So that is what government, infrastructural development. You can see the commitment of government to improve infrastructure, roads, railways, for instance, that you have seen, from which workers are benefiting. You can also see that electricity supply government is committed to improving it so that workers can invest and run their businesses effectively. So these are, I think, that overall, the Nigerian workers have been better off
Comrade,
than before.
Yes.
Before we look at the peculiarity of observing May Day in a state of pandemic such as COVID-19, I'd like for you again to, just as a response to what Dan has said, give us an idea of what it's been in terms of government's, policy response to, for instance, wage protection for workers, and social inclusion.
Well, thank you very much. The fact of it is that to look at the prism of how workers have fared, you must also look at the quality of life of an ordinary Nigerian worker, be it in the private sector, be it in government employment, and also you use some parameters to look at how they have been able to fare. Yes, we have tried our best. Government has also tried. But I can say clearly that when you compare where we are coming from, possibly because of the fact also that we have increased in number. I used to know that we have three stratas. You have those at the lower level, you have the middle class, then you have those at the higher level. But now I think the middle class have even disappeared. You only have possibly those at the higher level and possibly those at the lower level. I remember even me, that I'm just around about 50. When I graduated from school, I was able to access a loan. You will be able to get loan. You'll be able to get some facilities. At that time, I remembered the issue of paying your leave grant wasn't a problem. The issue of also you getting house or housing loan wasn't a problem. In fact, I recall that I was able to get a government house then. And I stayed in that government house. And recently, the current governor now sold it on Ona Ogupaya. Also, you recall that when you go to hospital, you bring the bill, government will pay. So, but all of this, over time, those things have also disappeared. And importantly is also that when you look at the trend of events, despite the fact that maybe the quantum of money that you have in your hand, the quantum is, but the value, the real value of the money, because of inflation, have gone down. So clearly speaking, those are the challenges that we are grappling with because of hyperinflation in our system. And the quantity of money you receive, you can receive 100 naira today, like the minimum wage of 30,000 today. If you put it side by side with what it used to be in 1981, which is $200. $200 today, you know how much it is. So these are the reality of the challenges that we are passing through.
But you seem to be having a good handshake with the present administration.
No, it's not about handshake. Usually we are partners in progress. What I'm saying is that workers and government and employers are partners in progress. There is no way you can make any progress without also working together to see to it that those issues are raised and then we find solution around them. And that's what I've been doing. Any issue that arose, we try to find solution around it. We look at also the peculiarities. Yes, we look at also the peculiarities of the situation on ground. How do we now strike a balance to make sure that the welfare of the worker doesn't suffer, and also other very key variables in government don't also suffer? And when you look at the condition of some of our employers in the private sector, it's very, very reckless. In the past, the issue of casualization was never there. Every worker has a social security cover.
This present administration is making efforts to provide conducive environment. for businesses to thrive?
Yeah, that is what I'm saying. See, you are asking me how have we fared over time? And I'm giving you a historical context of how we have reached where we are today. And clearly speaking, every regime that we have engaged, there are some gains, there are also some losses. That's the truth of it. Because in engagement, you also put all the parameters on the table on how you are able to look at those issues from different contexts and see how the condition of those workers can be improved. And particularly, you can also understand that, yes, some of those issues are issues that have been there for some time, like the issue of pension and gratuity. Let me tell you one issue, like the issue of pension and gratuity. You recall that in 2004, Labour had to resort and agree that we should now roll over to the contributory pension because of the fact that the liability was in trillions. Liabilities were not paid. And monumental corruption was going on in the scheme. So as part of the contribution of Labour is to go to we went to other countries to look at what are the models that we can be able to embrace. And then look at how we can be able to assist our workers. So clearly speaking, if you look at it, I've said there are some gains, but there are gains also that we have lost. And those are the issues I've put into context to now give us the right frame of mind to understand where we are coming from, where we are, and what we need to do. Take, for instance, the issue of social security cover, which we have the National Social Insurance Trust Fund. We have also the workman compensation. You have also the National
Housing Fund.
Yeah, National Health Insurance Scheme. But workers were the guinea pig that were used actually to start the public sector health insurance scheme. In fact, if you remember, we earned 10% of our salary as medical allowances. We actually gave out that 10%. That was the money that was used to start the National Health Insurance Scheme. And to date, we have not been able to expand beyond the public sector workers. These are the issues and these are the sacrifices we have made. And we are even conversing that, well, since the money that have accumulated and built the pool of resources we have is workers' money, can even the pensioners after retiring benefit from it? Because in other climes, you have social security cover for the aged, where you don't need to rely on your children when you get old. There is social security cover. You also have social security cover for the informal sector. In Kenya, as I speak to you, even if you employ one domestic servant, you must put that domestic servant on social security cover. So that the time he's leaving work, he's sure that he has something to fall back to.
For the unemployed.
Yes. Even for the unemployed and the aged. And even for the vulnerable groups. But clearly, those are areas that we are not yet there. We will work assiduously to look at it. But I'm also looking at the issue of how workers have fared. Because when you look at the issue of poverty, when people are quoting poverty figures, whether we are ahead or below, it's also to look at workers form part of also the people we are referring to. Because I said before now we have three stratas of workers, but now we are left with possibly two. So clearly speaking, it did not start overnight. But looking at the scenario of where we are coming from and what we need to do to make sure that those issues are taken on board, we must look at them from the context of where are we and how are we fared. That's the reality.
So you heard him. I will quickly, of course, take this one from you before we go to the COVID-19 issue. We just have two sectors. The middle one has been eroded. That's what the comrade had said. Give us an idea of what,
Madam, yeah, thank you. You see, the comrade president is speaking very well, and he is speaking more from the perspective of the Nigerian Labour Congress, which is the central workers' umbrella body. But I think that some of these things to address some of these ills, of these unfair labour practices that we are identifying that takes place in the various sectors, are things that they really need to have synergy with the affiliate unions. With the affiliate unions, because we are talking of freedom of association now, unionization and recognition. And some of the things we are finding out is that you may find out that some of the affiliate unions are not really pursuing these things, with the vigor and strength that it requires.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're not giving government the push.
No. Not necessarily they are not giving government a push. Because, for instance, if we in government, for instance, I know quite a lot of workers in companies there where the workers are not unionized. And even the employers sometimes will even discourage those workers from unionization. And you see most of the unions, for instance, not maybe capitulating, not really pursuing it, and therefore you give room for those employers to perpetrate all forms of unfair labor practices.
No, I think the problem...
I've noticed it.
But the problem, Dan, is not even there, because I've intervened in many struggles, which I think also Ministry of Labour have been part of it. First is that we are aware that we engage many banks. I recall in the time past we engaged many banks. That's how we got some of those banks allowing for unionization. Of recent, you are aware that we engage MTN. MTN in South Africa, they are unionized. But in Nigeria here, all the workers are not unionized. Those are the issues. So in the context of engagement, our laws are very explicit. It needs collaboration, because our laws allow that any worker should be allowed to unionize for the purpose of protecting his right, so that we can address this issue of perverse undermining of workers' interests and also using workers as slaves. So clearly speaking, what we are doing, and the unions are doing, which I'm sure they are doing their best, is to the effect that, in fact, some of those cases ended up in court, where workers' union will also assist workers that have been denied unionization and have been turned to slave. The issue will go to court, will get pronouncement. To enforce the judgment becomes a problem. And sometimes we have to also do a collective action. That's what we did in the case of MTN. We did in the case of the sweepers of the street here in Abuja. You see many of them that are not unionized and they are perverse. And gradually we are doing all of this. But
are they unionized now?
Yes, we need partnership.
Yeah,
we need our laws to be respected, because we are talking of human beings, and therefore anywhere they are Nigerians first and foremost. Okay. And therefore the dignity of every Nigerian is important, and that's why I think what is required is continuous synergy. The labor inspectors have their own responsibility, yes, which they have been doing. They are supposed to inspect every factory to ensure that standards are respected.
Okay, comrade.
And side by side with that is also the interface that unions will do, because most of the issues that will arise will also try to write to ministry, because government is a sovereign. And therefore we write to the ministry to say, okay, we have this problem. How do we partner and address this issue? And to be fair, most of those issues that arose, especially in the banking sector, I think the ministry have done excellently well. In fact, the minister was committed to see to it that our women working in the banking sector are not turned to be slaves, which is what has been happening. Once you marry, you are terminated from the bank. This is what has been happening. We have records, we have all of these things, and we are ready to engage them. Well, Officer Koro is here. That's why possibly the engagement have slowed down. If not, we have actually earmarked 2 banks to seal for 3 days all over the country. In fact, we had to write to the minister. He intervened. He called for a meeting. He even put a committee so that the issue can be resolved. But I'm not sure up till now the issue has been resolved. So clearly speaking, he has emphasized that our laws must be respected. Okay. Laws are not only there for people to continue to make profit. No. They should also understand the fact that their profits need to also address some of the challenges that are in the economy. Because if you sack workers, you are sure that you are compounding the unemployment situation. You are also breeding people that can now also compound the insecurity issue.
You know, you told me you've been at it for 32 years, and of course you like to stir issues. I don't want to give you the platform because you can exhaust our 1 hour on discussion, speaking. Let's look at the unusual celebration of Workers' Day amidst an unusual pandemic, coronavirus. Obviously, the worker has had a great toll. Let me hear from the government's perspective. What is the weight of the burden on the workers that this coronavirus has brought?
Quite huge, and you can also see it manifesting in some of the steps that some employers are already taking in terms of decisions to cut jobs by some very significant proportions, decisions to cut wages and salaries of employees, and One of the irony, the funny things about it is that some of them are even doing it without following the due process, which is one of the things that we are going to insist on. Now, for instance, that basically it amounts to declaration of redundancy. Well, that is because COVID-19 has led to a situation where enterprises can no longer, factories have been shut down, companies have been closed, businesses have now been liquidated. But it amounts to declaration of redundancy because we cannot employ you and there are no profits to sustain you. But the law says that you have to enter into negotiation with the unions, to discuss the extent to which the redundancy is going to affect the workers. Because both sides have to make sacrifices. The burden should not be on the worker alone. That is the stance that we have.
Okay.
Yes.
Comrade, we have less than 5 minutes, unfortunately.
Oh, that's serious.
Workers have been told, okay, there's been partial or gradual or phased or guided relaxation of the lockdown. How safe is it for your members to resume work?
Well,
considering the fact that
yes.
they have to, adhere to the safety guidelines, washing of the hands. In some of the offices, there are no provision of water.
Yes, in all of this difficulty brought about by COVID-19, we need to strike a balance. You have alluded earlier that there are many in the informal sector that cannot even have what to eat, talk less of maintaining their family. And this arose because of the lockdown. So we must strike a balance between continuous lockdown and also gradual opening up, so that those group of people who actually work in the morning to get something to eat in the evening will also have something to actually fall back to, because government clearly cannot give everybody palliative. That is obvious, because federal government has done it on, but in many states, nothing is happening. And most of these people live in the states. Because at the end of the day, if we don't strike a balance, then the challenge will be so enormous. So clearly speaking, yes, the decision that have been taken to do a gradual opening up of the economy is the right thing to do. And therefore, everybody, we have to take both individual responsibility and collective responsibility to make sure that the protocol that will be given by the Presidential Task Force and also NCDC is respected in the workplace. We have already told all our workers to be mindful of all of this and respect the protocols, because first, they need to protect themselves before now you can be able to do your work. So clearly speaking, I think that is the right thing to do, because you are like in the middle of a crisis. Okay. So you need to look at how to balance the issue and the challenge for you also not to compound the issue. Okay. And that's what government has done. Okay,
I'd like for both of you to also speak to issue. We hear that in some states and in some, like you alluded before, in the banking sector, some workers are being paid half salaries. Some workers are not even paid anything. How does Labour hope to address this issue?
Thank you very much. Yes, there have been threats to job losses. There have been threats to wages. And clearly speaking, Labour will use its collective power, willpower, to make sure that no worker suffers the consequence of what is happening. Because one, at the end of the day, is the poor worker that will be at the receiving end if he loses his job. And it compounds our socio-economic situation. So that's part of why unions are there. And that's why also we have laws that must be followed, that must be respected before even you do some of those things that they wanted to do. But some have gone ahead to try to do it. And that's why we have called the attention of government to say, well, this is what our law said. And therefore, they have a responsibility. Like all of us know that yes, some businesses, especially small and medium scale enterprises, may be in difficulty. But we are also working with NECA. And NECA have been very, very helpful to say, no, in this challenging period, you also must remember the sacrifice that the workers have done. Okay. How the workers have contributed in building your enterprise. How the workers have contributed in building your profit. So the profit you have had over time is the right time now to show human face.
Okay, let me bring down here. A particular section of the Labour Act mandates that workers, of course, take their annual leave. Now, as a result of COVID-19, some businesses are compelling their workers to go on annual leave rather than defer those leaves. Is that not a breach of contract?
It's a breach. It's not the appropriate thing to do.
Okay.
Yes, because already there's lockdown, and you want workers to go on annual leave in the midst of the lockdown. But personally, I don't think it is appropriate because for most organizations, anyway, you know that usually at the beginning we will have drawn up a roster. For instance, let me give an example of what we do in my ministry, of when everybody is supposed to go on leave. So we spread leave out across the year. So if it is not time, and I've planned my leave, I've planned that this is what I want to do at this particular leave, this is how I want to enjoy, this is where I want to be to, and you suddenly you come and force me to go on leave at the time I was also prepared for it. I don't think it works that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like you to respond to that briefly.
Yes, no, there is a question you asked him which I started, but you cut me off.
Yes,
you said,
please.
how have we fared under the present administration? You asked that question, which I think is fundamental. We put some facts very straightforward. Yes, I can say clearly that...
we have just 2 minutes.
Yes, there are areas that I think we must appreciate what have been done. Let me give you one example. The Nigerian Airways pensioners, for over 20 years, they were not paid. When the issue was raised, this present government actually paid, and we are grateful for that. 2, during the very difficult period preceding 2015, when more than 22 states could not pay salary, the federal government actually gave bailout. So I can say that very obviously, if not because of the inattitude of some of our governors, because some of them collected this money and pocketed it, and nothing happened, we would not have been in that difficult situation.
What will happen to
so
those
clearly,
who lose their jobs as a result of COVID-19? Just in the same.
Okay, simple. We will continue to insist that the social security cover must be extended to them. And we will not allow a situation where a worker will be treated like a slave, which means you are given a letter the next day and you leave and nothing happens. Our laws will be respected. We'll ensure that the provisions of our laws in respect of the dignity of the worker will be respected. And we're going to use, as I said, our collective strength to make sure that we defend those workers, working with our affiliates to ensure that the right thing is done and workers are actually respected. Workers should not actually, for any reason, fall into the category of those that will be under a precarious situation. Secondly, also, is the fact that at the state levels, we have already informed our state councils. Anywhere you have this problem, because it's not also about only one category of workers, it's all the workers, we will show solidarity. Okay. Because in solidarity lies our strength. Okay. So there will be solidarity of action in order to protect everyone.
Your final words?
Well, my final word is that whatever is happening, because collective bargaining, collective agreements reached between employers and workers did not anticipate COVID-19 and some of the harsh outcomes of it. Okay. So we advocate that people should go into dialogue. They may need to look at our collective agreements, look at collective agreements. It's not about losing jobs, but what will happen after COVID-19.
Okay.
You retrench or you send away most of your key staff, key officers, and then COVID-19 comes, you open this enterprise again. Where will you get the jobs, the workers to do the work? So they have to look at it and balance it. You see, we just came out of, just before, on the eve of 2020, we are celebrating the ILO centenary. And we signed the declaration, all our 3 parties, in which we guarantee to have a future of work that will guarantee prosperity for all. Now, this has been challenged, so we have to review it.
All right.
Yeah. All
right. I'd like to thank both of you, Comrade Ayuba Waba, who is, of course, the national president of the Nigerian Labour Congress, NLC, himself, of course, public health specialist. You are?
I'm an epidemiologist. I have masters in public health, so I'm an epidemiologist also.
Thank you very much.
That's my field.
Thank you very much, Comrade, for joining me. And then, of course, I'm trying to get your surname, Neburago.
Yes, you are trying.
Director of Productivity Measurement and Labour Standards, Ministry of Labour and Employment. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
All right, and that's it this week on Late Edition. I'd like to thank you for watching from me and the production crew. Bye-bye.